3 weeks of hearings, all surrounding 20 crucial minutes in Luigi Mangioni's life. Journalists and lawyers alike all thought it would take a matter of days to decide what evidence can and can't be used in the New York State trial for Luigi Mangioni. But days before the hearing was due to start, the defence asked for 5 pairs of socks and underpants for Mangioni. Then we heard there could be 28 witnesses called. Here we are, 3 weeks later, and it's just finished. So, what have we learned? This is the Mangioni Trial podcast from the BBC World Service. I'm Jordan Dunbar. It's been over 12 months since the killing of health insurance CEO Brian Thompson and the arrest of 27-year-old Luigi Mangioni, who's facing trial for his murder. Mangioni denies all charges against him. I've got 2 guests with me to try and make sense of everything we've heard in court, and they've been in there every day. First, we have Terry Austin, a former trial attorney and our legal expert, here to help us understand what all this will mean for the trial. Hi, Terry.
Hi, Jordan. Thanks for having me.
Terry, let's just talk about briefly, this was all about evidence. What was the evidence the defence and prosecution were arguing about?
Yes, so the defense is the one who made the motion. They are trying to suppress both statements and evidence. They're claiming that Luigi Mangioni was not given his Miranda rights. And so therefore, all of the statements he made should be omitted.
Okay, so that's the statement we'll have heard in films and TV. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you do say may or may not be used in evidence against you.
They're also claiming that there was not a proper warrant issued for the arrest, and so they should not have taken any of the evidence, including the backpack, the journal, which has been called a manifesto, the gun, everything. They're saying he wasn't Mirandized and he should not have done those statements, and he didn't have a warrant, and so there was no warrant for his arrest, and so they should not have gone through his possessions, basically.
I mean, we thought originally this might be 3 days, at most a week. Here we are 3 weeks later. Is it unusual that a pre-trial hearing should take this long?
It is unusual, and I think what the defense is trying to do is keep everything out. And it doesn't usually take this long because, generally speaking, most defense attorneys will select 1 or 2 items as opposed to everything. They essentially don't want any of his statements and any of the evidence to be used. So that's why it's taking so long. The judge is literally looking at pieces of evidence from photos, and he is literally looking at all the body cams from the police officers, from every angle, from every police officer. So that took a lot of time.
One of the things people online were looking for is what Luigi Mangioni would actually be wearing when he came to court. Previously, he'd been in prison uniforms, and they're waiting to see what his own clothes would be like.
That is the first thing that everyone looks for. What is he wearing today? Is it a white shirt? Is it a plaid shirt? Is it a gray suit? Is it a black suit? But, the other thing about Luigi Mangioni is he was very vivid, very interested in who was there. He looked around every time the photographers came to take his photo.
One of the most shared photos was of him kind of leaning in with a fist pump motion.
And it's interesting, Jordan, because frankly, if I had been their defense attorney, I would not have said, make a fist pump or, motion your hands in any way, shape, or form. Just sit there and smile, because you don't want people to get the wrong impression that he thinks he's got this case covered, that he thinks he's going to win. Well, you want your defendant to just sit, be serious, maybe a small smile or maybe no smile at all. Just have the photographers do it. You're doing your duty. It would have been up to his attorney to actually advise him what to do, what not to do. So I'm a little surprised that they wanted him, it seems, to be as animated as he was.
We're also joined by Matthew Lee, who's senior reporter for Inner City Press. Matthew, you spend a lot of your time in the Southern District Court, don't you?
Very much so.
Matthew, I want to come to you to get into more detail about the evidence and what we've learnt in the last 3 weeks. So let's go to that evidence. I'm going to start chronologically with the arrest in McDonald's. What have we learnt?
Somehow, 5 days after the shooting, he was sitting in the morning in a in a McDonald's in Altoona, Pennsylvania, eating a hash brown and a sandwich. We're not sure if it was a steak sandwich or bacon, egg, and cheese. We still don't know. It was interesting the first time through because the officers were trying to keep him calm. They didn't want him to know that they knew or suspected that he was the New York shooter. So they said, no, we've been called here because you were staying here too long. He says, my name is Mark Rosario from New Jersey. And he gives them a very good looking driver's license. Like if it looked good. It was fake. They ran it through the system and the person didn't exist. Finally, they said to him, if you keep giving us a false name, we're going to arrest you for misleading the police. He said, my name is Luigi Mangione. Then they misspelled his name and ran it through and it didn't come back. Then he spelled it right. All of this, though, took place in about 15 minutes.
During the hearings, you got to hear the 911 call that was made by an employee at McDonald's and the reactions of the officers on the radio when they got called to the scene. What did they sound like?
I think what I took from the tone of voice, and also as they sliced it up this way, even the woman in the McDonald's, the manager that called the police, didn't really believe it was him. The evidence of that was the police themselves were joking when they drove over there. The lieutenant said to Officer Detweiler, now famous Officer Detweiler, who drove over there, if it's really him, I'll buy you a hoagie, which is a Pennsylvania word for a long sandwich with a lot of Italian meats on it. So, but when they got there, they said, take down. The first thing he said to him is, can you take down your mask? And he took down his mask, and you can tell, Detweiler said, I knew it was him immediately.
There was a surreal detail in the body cam footage of the arrest in that there were Christmas songs being played throughout. So you're watching it multiple times. It's soundtracked by these different Christmas songs.
Not that many songs either. I've heard Holly Jolly Christmas about 100 times in the last 9 days. It just happened to be the soundtrack that was playing in there. And so when you show 9 different versions of the same interaction, you're going to get that song again and again. I don't think I'll ever listen to Christmas music the same again.
Matthew, what is the point the defense are trying to make in these cross-examinations? What's the point they're trying to make in getting into all of these details?
This is sort of the bigger picture of what the defense is trying to say is that this is a small town police department and they suddenly realize, whoa, we've got a big fish.
Yeah, the most wanted man in America is in town.
Exactly. And so essentially the argument is that they went around the rules, they bent the rules, they made a lot of mistakes because they couldn't handle it. It wasn't like NYPD, like let's bring in the official evidence guys that know what all the rules are and are not going to screw anything up.
So the defense are trying to prove to the judge that the arrest was carried out incorrectly. What examples did they point out during the hearing?
There's at least 2 big grounds for suppression. One is questioning before giving the warning, or after Luigi said, I don't want to answer. No one tortured him. And we have seen the film, they know, but the question is, was he free to leave? Did he feel intimidated? Did the police officers have guns on their belts?
I mean, you watched the footage of the arrest multiple times. Did it look like he could leave?
That's one of the things the judge is going to have to decide on. I could see a certain kind of judge saying it was obvious that he couldn't leave. It was an intimidating presence of armed officers. And someone else might say okay, this is like a small town. The guys are there walking around talking about breakfast sandwiches with their walkie-talkies squawking. He should have asked to leave. But yeah, that's exactly the question. Was he free to leave?
Matthew, it came up that officers had switched off their body cameras at certain points.
So you have 9 different officers filming. When they stepped outside to talk, they turned their body cams off. They're allowed to do that. They're only required under Pennsylvania process when they interact with the public, they turn it on. So no one can say they roughed somebody up if they didn't. I mean, the body cam protects the officer as well as the defendant. It basically means no one can say something happened that didn't happen. But when they step outside to talk to each other, what are we going to do next? They didn't just turn the audio off, they turned the whole thing off.
Okay, right. So that is within the rules. Away from the actual arrest, there were 2 prison officers, correction officers on the stand. They were in charge of looking after Mangione in prison. During cross-examination, they said they had conversations with him where he talked about having a ghost gun, a trip to Thailand, talking about different healthcare systems in countries around the world. A fairly wide-ranging conversation. What was it the defense were arguing about these conversations?
No, I think that they're saying that by implication he was in he shouldn't have been questioned. That these guys shouldn't have been having any conversations with him at all because he was a detained suspect.
Okay, and that's not right because that's not their job. Their job is to keep him safe while he's in prison.
Exactly. So they
Monitor
were
him.
trying to imply that they were basically like a prosecutor couldn't go in there and say, "Hi, I'm with the New York DA's office. Do you want to confess?" They'd have to. By that time, he already had a lawyer. But if you can't stop people from talking, so I think what they tried to do in the suppression hearing, and they will try to do even more at trial, is to say that these guys were operating consciously or even unconsciously as agents of the prosecution. That they knew that their questions were designed to get evidence for trial, and they weren't just shooting the breeze.
So while the hearings are about the suppression of evidence, what gets in and what doesn't get in, it also gives each side a chance to see what these witnesses are like in the stand.
I mean, I think another way to view the suppression hearing is a trial run. All of these witnesses, or most of them, will be put on the stand at trial. And so it does help the defense to see where the weaknesses are. There's a
Okay.
political element here where almost all of the cops said that they had seen news of this on Fox News, which is it's not more conservative leaning. It's more right wing. And in fact, one of the officers, they said, "Why do you get your news on this from Fox?" And he said, "Because the other stations all made him a hero." So this is a guy I think they're going to want for a New York jury at trial. They're going to want to create the impression that these are right wing officers that
Right.
were outraged that a left wing assassin had come to their town and wanted to put him away, whether they broke the rules or not. That's what they're going to imply.
Terry, I want to come back to you on the backpack and the search. So allegedly within the backpack there was a notebook, some writings, the murder weapon, lots of evidence. What is it the defense are saying is wrong with the police search of that backpack?
The defense is saying that the police from Altoona should have gotten a warrant before they even moved the bag, before they even touched the bag, much less before they went through the bag. So here in New York, I mean, police officers oftentimes get warrants. And here it's a little bit different. You pick up the phone, you call a judge, you get a warrant, and you search the person, you search the bag. In Altoona, it's different. The process is different. If you are arrested, then they have the right to do a search incident to that arrest. And the defense is saying, that's not the case. His, rights were violated and all of this should be left out. I don't think the judge is going to agree with that.
You watched that footage so many times in that McDonald's from so many different angles. What was some of the kind of inconsistencies? There was something about how the bag was transported to the police station and the search.
Okay, so one of the things that happens when you do a search is you do have to make sure that there is custodial possession from beginning to end. And
So that means the like law enforcement, someone that should have it has it all the time.
that is correct. And so the defense is making a lot of arguments. Not only are they saying the bag should not have been searched, but they are saying that the chain of custody wasn't as tight as it should have been. They're basically saying you didn't inventory the containment of that bag. You didn't make sure that it went from one police officer to the next, logged everything. So they're basically trying to say that none of it should go in because you did not maintain that chain of custody and you didn't log everything correctly. They're also talking about, all of these documents that don't match up. And what the officers were saying on the stand is, okay, but this inventory log is more detailed. This log, which is maybe the search warrant log, only says things like clothing. It doesn't specifically say jacket, shirt, socks. So that's why there are inconsistencies. But the defense is trying to say all of these logs should have been the same.
And in the gun wasn't discovered when the officer searched in McDonald's. It was discovered later on. There was a thing about how long it took to get from Altoona McDonald's to the police station, and the officer driving it took longer than the other ones. There's no body cam. Can you talk me through some of those details?
So there was a discrepancy between the time that Officer Wasser, the female officer, got to the police station, she had the bag, the backpack, and then one of the other officers had the McDonald's bag. So everything wasn't fitting in the backpack. So he had a laptop. There were several other items, a hat. I don't recall all the details, but there were several items that did not go back into the backpack.
So they've been split up.
Yes. So they split some things in the backpack and some things in the McDonald's bag. And one officer took the McDonald's bag. The other officer took the backpack. And the defense is claiming because it took Officer Wasser 2 minutes more that she went through the bag. That was the allegation. In fact, when Karen Agnifilo questioned Officer Wasser on the stand, she said, isn't it a fact that, you stopped and searched the bag? That's how you knew the gun was in there. And that's the first thing that you found when you got to the police station, and you didn't find it when you were at the McDonald's? And Officer Wasser said, no, that's not the case. It just took me 2 extra minutes, but I essentially did not open that bag until I got to the police station.
Why did they say they didn't find it when they searched through they didn't find the gun when they searched through it in McDonald's, but they did in the police station?
What they were claiming is they did the initial search at the McDonald's, but they didn't go through everything. They were essentially doing a brief search to just make sure there weren't any weapons. Obviously, they missed that. And so it wasn't until they got to the police station and they tried to say it was, in a position that they just couldn't feel it when they saw the bag and went through the bag at the McDonald's. And so they kind of stopped. And the reason they stopped is one of the lieutenants said, okay, you found a silencer or you found the magazine. I think it was the magazine. And they said, let's do the rest at the office. So they did not want to get anything contaminated. They did not want to expose the public to a firearm. And their decision to go back and finish the search was out of the safety for the public. So that's what they're saying. And then as soon as they got to the police office, they found the gun.
These are just some of the arguments the defense have made over the last 3 weeks over what is essentially 20 minutes of time. Arguments about what evidence will be seen in the trial and what won't. But Terry, I have a question. I've seen it. I mean, I've seen footage, I've seen pictures. It's already been released to the public and press. How do you ensure Luigi Mangione gets a fair trial when so much of this evidence is out there?
That's an excellent question. And that's what the defense is claiming, that so much evidence is already in the public eye. And because of that, they're claiming they're not going to get a fair trial. They're not going to get a pool of jurors who are unbiased because they've already seen all this information. So what the defense is going to have to do at the end of the day is when they voir dire that jury, they're going to have to make sure, look, you've heard of this case. You've seen some of the evidence. Can you put that aside? Can you be fair? That's the question. So it may seem like it's not fair, but when you have a case of this exposure, you just have to put that aside. And that's what the prosecution is arguing. Look, these people know about this evidence, but everyone knows about this evidence. And so we're going to just have to make sure we find jurors who can put that aside, only consider the evidence that's put before them at the trial, and only consider the law that the judge tells them about.
And it's Judge Caro who will decide what evidence stays in and what evidence doesn't. And he said he will rule on that on May 18th. Terry, thank you so much for joining us.
Bye, Jordan. Thank you.
And thank you, Matthew, for joining us too.
Thanks, Jordan. It was fun.
That's it from this episode of the Mangione Trial from the BBC World Service with me, Jordan Dunbar. We'll be back bringing you major updates and looking at the wider impact of this case with new episodes in 2026. We'll be talking about how to ensure a fair trial, to how the case has changed the security industry and the ultra wealthy. Don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel so you never miss an episode. If you've heard a claim you want us to fact check or a question for us to tackle, you can email us at themangionitrial@bbc.co.uk or WhatsApp us. Just scan this QR code.